Hi everyone, this is Jeffrey, JGB146 Blake from Grinderschool.com, a small stakes poker training site, and we're partnering with WSOP.com to bring you some poker training videos. Today I'm recording a $10 sit and go played recently on the World Series of Poker.com, and the first thing I want to highlight is just the number of hands that are played versus not played, because I think the biggest mistake that a lot of players make is playing way too many hands early on and way too few hands late in the game. So you can kind of look over to the side here, and basically almost every hand I play is in yellow, which means you can see the vast majority of hands are not hands that I play, and that'll include some fairly big hands in some cases, some hands that players would think are fairly big hands. You can deviate from this a little bit and sort of tailor it to the way the games that you're playing play. The tighter they are, the looser you can justify playing, particularly in late position. And then the looser that the games play, if you typically get down to the point that you have high blinds and there's only 3 or 4 players left, then you should basically play extremely tight in the early levels, and really even in tighter games you should play pretty tight, except if you're knowledgeable about your opponents and stealing from late position. Now, with all of that said, we're going to go ahead and start digging in and basically just looking through the hands that I actually played. We're starting with this ace-6 from the big blind. I'll note that basically if I was not in the big blind, I wouldn't be playing this hand, but it is strong enough to call us, a min raise from "I'm sorry, sir." So on the flop, I go ahead and I call his small bet. I think that he's making a continuation bet pretty much all of the time. I'm sort of thinking that he's a player that's just going to put forth way too much money, and I really expect that most of the time I actually am going to have the best hand here. Plus, there's not a whole lot on the line. I know I'm going to be extremely tight. I know that anything I end up losing in this hand isn't going to cost me all that much down the line. And I really feel like I've played some other games with this particular opponent, and I just really feel like he is betting with any 2 cards here. So it's just close enough that I think going ahead and continuing the hand is worthwhile. The turn doesn't really change much of anything. If anything, I think he can have some draws here, but I really think he's just betting at basically anything, expecting none of this to really fit in my hand. And then on the river, it's a blank. The draw comes in and he checks. I go ahead and I make a bet, and I sized it fairly small, just over half pot. The reason for this bet size is basically because it's going to look like a flush. It's going to be the sort of minimum I can bet to get him to fold most of his hands, and I think he is folding most of his hands. This operates as a scare card, so anything legitimate that he had is probably going away now, because he's going to think that I played through this far with the flush draw. Interestingly enough, if I had the flush draw, I probably would have folded on the flop. And the reason for that is that we think he's playing any 2 cards, so having equity against that range is important. And with just a flush draw, we wouldn't have enough equity to show down against his range of any 2 cards. We need more, and we'd have to be playing aggressively and getting the pot to be bigger than it really needs to be. All of that said, everything about the way this hand unfolded is unnecessary for playing sit and goes and for winning sit and goes. You could have folded this hand pre-flop and been fine, folded it on the flop and been fine. It's almost a risk that's unnecessary to take. I just felt like I knew this particular opponent well enough to justify it. He does fold, and we pick up a few chips. Here, because I have a few extra chips, I go ahead and play against the same player who's splashing around in far too many pots, and play a suited connector in position. Essentially here, I'm not going to try to take more pots away from him. I'm looking to actually make a strong hand, play it in position. He let me play it cheaply, and blinds are still really small, so playing suited connectors in position is worthwhile at this point, as long as you're not going to tie up very many chips with them. I didn't hit, so I went away. A few hands later, we're up to the 25-50 blind level. Things are starting to get a little bit more interesting, and we get a min bet from the button. I choose to go ahead and call with King Jack here. Again, this is something, we don't even have to start defending at this point. We've seen, I'm sorry, sir, splashing around a lot. As I said, he's a player I've seen doing this a number of times, and we're already getting players, losing big portions of their stack, busting out. The game's active enough that we wouldn't even have to defend here out of position with King Jack. It's a hand that we could get into trouble with. I went ahead and defended because it was a min raise, and I think that there's enough equity to justify it as long as we don't invest much in the pot post flop. Here it checks around again on the turn, and then we happen to hit the river. Small value bet. At that point, we were pretty confident we had the best hand. If anyone had ace jack, it would be a pretty extreme situation, and we still wouldn't have put in, many more chips, if any. We probably would have called a min raise, but anything larger than that, we probably would have just let it go, because the power of our chips staying in our stack is more powerful than what the value of this pot is. So the very next hand we play is a hand where we have pocket aces. It's folded to us, and blinds are now 75-150. So we're getting to the point here for sure that it actually is, we're justified in starting to play more hands, particularly if we get opportunities to steal in position. Drill Spy is not a good target for us to steal from, so that may have to hold us back a little bit until blinds get a little bit higher. We've seen on other tables, I've seen that he tends to defend blinds. You want to include that information, and especially with him having a deeper stack, it's going to lead him to feel like he can call a lot more bets than we'd really like to see. That said, obviously pocket aces, we'd play this at any stage of the game, play it for a raise. I'm raising just under 3 times the big blind. This is about my standard raise size at this level, although you could even go a little bit smaller for your standard size. It could be 325, 350 would be fine as well. But obviously here, if we can get any callers, the more the raise can be, the better. And turns out we just get folds. That's fine. We'd much rather just have everyone fold than to let blinds stay in for cheap and end up losing a big pot that we should have won. The next hand that we're playing is a hand where we have King 9 suited from the big blind, and let's see what happens. So folds around all the way to the small blind. You can see this table is playing fairly tightly. Small blind makes a min raise once again. We've seen this. He's probably the loosest player. Mum Tree is certainly another looser player at the table. Everyone else is playing fairly tight. What this means, when he's playing loose, blinds are big. We need to defend with a wider than normal range. King 9 suited is certainly within that range, so we definitely want to play back here. You could call, but blinds being as large as they are, 75-150, effective stack sizes of just a little over 2,000. Really, this pot of 450 is enough that we can justify just going ahead, shoving the chips in, and seeing where we lie. Most of the time, we're going to get folds because I'm so sorry, sir, at this point has basically any 2 cards. He would raise with pretty much anything here. And that's what we're kind of looking for. We're also wanting to set up a pattern wherein he doesn't try to steal from our blinds every single time. We want it to be clear that we will defend and that he's going to be losing chips if he does this with too wide a range. So that's what we do, and indeed he folds. and we move on. So the next hand we get is an early position ace-jack, and again we make the standard 400 chip raise. This hand is actually not a hand that I would play from this early position if we were at the 10-20 blind level. There's just not enough upside to play it out of position, and we don't need the chips at that point. But now that the blinds are bigger, it's a hand that we definitely do want to play. We're betting 400 here. If one of the tighter players were to go ahead and come over the top, we probably would let it go unless it was a player we had seen shoving a lot, just because their ranges are not such that we want to risk all our stack on this type of hand when they're re-raising us. If, on the other hand, they were a strong player who did a lot of kind of 3-bet shoving to take advantage of the size of the pot and to build on that, then we would call. Against either of the shorter stack players, Luck is Real or the Mum Tree here, we would certainly go ahead and test our metal, because they're going to be playing a lot of weaker aces and shoving those, as well as potentially some hands like a King-Queen, a King-Jack, maybe even like a Queen-10 or a Jack-10. So we'd definitely be playing those hands. And in fact, what we see is that exact situation. So we get a shove from the short stack, we call. Certainly there are times, he would shove with jacks here, he would shove with queens, kings, aces, but he's also shoving with lower pairs, as we see, and he's shoving with a lot of lower aces and other face card hands that we are very, very strong against. So we're well over 50% equity to call here, and we don't even need to be. We're not risking our tournament life, so it's really a no-brainer call. It turns out that we end up with a flush and take the hand down, and that obviously worked out well for us. A few hands later, we have ace-7. It folds all the way around to our friend. I'm sorry, sir. So he's making a larger bet, but we have a real hand here. And again, since we know that he's playing a wide range, we know that our ace X is going to be ahead of that range. We also know that he's going to go away a lot of the time. He's shown that against us, and I think against some of the other players at the table. So this is a very easy point to shove all our chips in. And also, because we won the coin flip, we now have enough chips to justify this play, knowing that even if we lose, we still have 2,000 or so chips. So a very, very easy play here. And again, he does fold and go away, and that leaves us with a pretty strong chip lead on the table now. A few hands later, we get pocket aces. Obviously, that is good for everyone. However, it's almost a waste at this table. The reason I say that is that people are folding pretty easily, and we could just as easily have had ace deuce here, and it would have gone just about the same. The next hand we play is a queen 7 suited. So first off, note that our loosey-goosey player here is busted out. He busted against Drill Spy. And Mum Tree collected, I think, some chips from him as well prior to the bust. So what happens? Well, it folds all the way around to our small blind, and we just shove in. Why did we shove? At this point, the stacks are 150, or the blinds are 150, 300, and Mum Tree here, his effective stack size is less than 10 big blinds. So any raise we make should effectively be committing us, and anytime you're doing that, you don't want to encourage your opponent to play against you unless you're in a very extreme situation. If we had pocket aces, we probably wouldn't shove here unless we had been shoving a lot, because we don't want to deviate from our pattern just based on the strength of our hand. In any case, here the pot is big enough. We certainly can't fold this strong a hand, and certainly not when we have the chip lead already. And we want to make sure that we apply maximum pressure by just shoving. We'd be shoving against anyone at the table except possibly Drill Spy. Next hand we play is exactly one orbit later, It is a 9-10 suited hand, and the blinds are even bigger now at 200, 400. And it's basically going to play out the same way. We're going to make a shove. We have a playable hand. We're going to make a shove against Mumtree and look to take down the blinds, because the blinds are so big that they're very meaningful. We've got the ante in there. It's a $900 pot. That's meaningful. Even with us having the chip lead, that's a very meaningful portion of our stack that's in the middle. He's going to have a hard time calling. Now, he should be calling pretty wide here. He has, what, 5 times the big blind with 2,000 chips at 200, 400. And with the antes in there, his stack is even smaller than that. However, other players at the table have short stacks as well, and that's going to tend to make a lot of players call more tightly than they should, which in the end just works out good for us. A few hands later, some things get interesting. So we're in the big blind now, and we're here with a 10 deuce. It's 200, 400, and what we're going to see happen is that Bounty Savage shoves for just over 1,000 chips. Billow Curve is going to fold, and now it's to us. So we're looking at this, and we essentially have to call 662 chips, and we have a chance of busting a player out, getting to the bubble with a big chip lead, and taking down a pot of 1,900 chips. So for 600 chips, we could win 1,900. There are certainly hands that we're not strong enough against, but against the range of a player this short, we're certainly strong enough to make this risk, to take this risk and justify it. It's a very easy call here with any 2 cards. There's not a single hand in the deck I would fold here, because we went often enough to make it profitable. We're against Ace Queen, and I just want to note that we're in a good situation here. Not once the flop comes out, but when we evaluate the equities of our 2 hands pre-flop, you can see we're 31% to win the pot, and the odds we were getting were such that it was essentially a 4-to-1 call. So as long as we were 25% or better, then we're in good enough shape to make that call. So even though we have a really junky hand and he has a really big hand, that's fine pre-flop. Now on the flop, obviously, we don't want him to make a pair, because that sort of ruins our chance of anything happening short of us getting extremely lucky. And we don't, and he ends up taking it down. He doubled up, but that's not bad. We're still in good shape. We're one of the few big stacks of the table, and it's also relevant that we have this Mumtree player who we have seen is extremely tight in the blinds. His position is going to help us out throughout the tournament. So we didn't win that one. We lost a few chips, but we're still in good shape in the tournament. We're still in good shape. So what's next? Well, next we're in the small blind, and it is folded around to us, and of course we shove. We had been looking for playable hands to shove against Mumtree, against shorter stack players who are inclined to call as often as they should. We wouldn't shove this 4-7. We might, against an average player, we might. We probably would. Against a player like Mumtree, who has been very tight, has not been calling shoves throughout the tournament, he may have called once and shown up with a very premium hand. What that tells us is that almost all the time he's going to fold here. That means that we want to shove all of the time with any 2 cards. So we do. He folds, and we win the pot. A couple of hands later, we have Ace Queen, and we're second to act. We make a standard raise just over 2 times the big blind and get folds all the way around. If Billow Curve had shoved all in or made a standard raise, we would have shoved in as well, because this is a premium hand, but we would have gotten out of the way with anything short of a premium hand, because we're very inclined to just let some of the short stacks duke it out themselves, to let us get into the bubble situation where we can abuse it and then into the money. None of that happens, and our Ace Queen takes the pot down, and we can see a few hands later we're in the small blind. we play another hand, that's because it's folded around to us once again. It's an easy spot to raise. Note that I just raised. We're still committing our entire stack again, or Mumtree's entire stack. We just didn't have to shove. We wouldn't actually even hate it if he had called there, because we're starting to be able to build our stack up. We're going to start stealing more widely as the game goes on, but keeping him in puts more pressure on our opponents as we move toward a big stack situation. That said, if he had called, and 8-7 is a strong enough hand that we're going to have some pretty decent equity against anything he calls with anyways. So we wouldn't have minded a call too much. It wouldn't have been risking very much at all. But we're even happier with a fold because there's a lot of money in that pot. Note that he has busted out now, and it is to us in this first act. We're on the bubble, so there's a wide range of hands we would play and raise here. The one thing that we need to be cautious about is seeing what hands Drill Spy is going to play back at us with. He has position on us, and he has a bigger stack, so he could make our life a little bit painful, which would cause us to try to target our opportunities in a different way. But if he's not going to play back at us, then that's great, and we can just exploit the shorter stack players and try to steal from them as often as they seem to let us do. With ace-8, that's strong enough for us to just play. We're just shoving in because we don't want to call, and blinds are big enough really that we're just going to shove anything we play. Next hand, we are in the big blind. We have Queen 4 suited. That really doesn't matter to us. We get folds all the way around, and we pick up the pot. A few hands later, we have pocket queens, and we get it all in. So what happens here? Well, it's folded around to the small blind. He shoves, and of course we call. That was a no-brainer call. Unfortunately, our major hand did not hold up against his random King X hand. So the very next hand, we're in the small blind. We have a shorter stack, and I guess I can let it deal the cards. We have a King 3, and it is folded to us, and we choose to shove. So at this point, we have only 5 times the big blind, and we have a hand that is better than average, and we're four-handed. There's a huge amount of chips out there. There's 600, 900 from our small blind, 1100 chips. A third of our stack is in the middle already. So we're literally shoving with any playable hand, and probably with any two, because we can't really let this opportunity pass us by. There's so many chips in the middle that we really can't just fold when we're only going to potentially have to play against one player. We shove. Obviously, we would prefer that he folds most of the time, but he doesn't. He calls. He has us beat, but it's a situation where we're roughly 40% against his 60%, and we get lucky. So that's unlucky for Drill Spy, but I don't really feel too bad given that we got unlucky with our pocket queens. The next hand, we go ahead. We're on the button. From the button, I choose to fold the 10-5. So stack sizes is the primary reason that I did this. This is a hand, it's a garbage hand, but we should at this point be stealing pretty wide. We have a decent enough stack that we could risk stealing. However, both of these players are going to be desperate. Both of them have been shoving a fair amount, as we've seen from the earlier play with the ace-queen. He's not afraid to mix it up a little bit, and we don't yet, having shown that 10 deuce call, we don't want to encourage overly wide calls. So I think it makes sense to go ahead, let this one go, and let the two short stacks play against each other. Notice that they both have ridiculously weak hands, and they're essentially all in against each other, winner takes all. And then we're down to a three-handed situation. This is ideal for us because we have a reasonable stack. We aren't the shortest stack. We're still going to be playing pretty much push-fold poker, and we're going to play fairly loose. We shove with the queen 10. That's an easy shove three-handed from any position. The next hand, we're in the big blind with king jack, and we get a shove. I choose to call here. Now that we're in the money, I suspect Drill Spy is going to be shoving a lot more loosely than he was against our big blind before, and king jack is just a very strong hand against the range that I expect him to be shoving. Blinds are so big that we can barely afford to fold much of anything, because again, we're in that situation where it's 5 times the big blind. Our stack isn't large enough to support super loose calls, but we definitely need to call here with sort of any face card, and obviously any broadways are much better than that. Any face card, any pair, and even some weaker hands than that. Turns out we're ahead. Flop looks a little dangerous when we see the 10, but then we make a pair and then we back it up with hitting our second nut flush. So now we enter into heads up and we are in the chip lead. So there are a few different theories about heads up play. You can go out guns blazing and be super aggressive, and that's a winning way to play. I like to kind of test the waters and see how my opponent's going to play a little bit. So I'll do some aggressive play, and I'll do some sort of less aggressive play with playable hands. Queen 6 suited is playable, so I want to give my opponent the opportunity to show me how he's going to be playing. So that's why I just completed on the button. Normally from the button you want to be raising a wide variety of hands because you're in position post-flop, but here I just completed. It's strong enough to play, and I really just kind of want to see what he's going to be doing. If he's going to be shoving every hand, I'll adjust for that. If he's going to be very passive, I'll adjust for that. So here, post flop he shoves. We have nothing. We're not going to call with just a queen high. And the next hand we have 7-6, and he shoves and we fold. We're not calling quite that wide, but we're also noticing that he is playing a very aggressive game, and that's going to influence some of our decisions down the line. So this Jack 3 hand, we fold. That might be a slight mistake. We really probably, with a face card here, want to go ahead and shove. We don't know what kinds of hands we're going to be getting throughout the rest of the tournament. So I think we could justify shoving there with pretty much any face card. I don't think that he's going to be inclined to call us super wide. So I think his game is mostly reliant, especially since we've shown that we're not shoving every hand. I think he's going to be mostly reliant on trying to steal from us and then pick up hands as opposed to just calling us down lightly, which argues for shoving hands like this. And then the hand after that, we get pocket nines, and he just folds to us. So unfortunate. The next hand, we get a king 5. Here, we're definitely going to be shoving. It's a bit better than the jack 3 we folded, and we already said we should have shoved the jack 3. He does wake up with a hand and ends up calling us. That's unlucky, but it doesn't make our shove any worse. We lose in probably the worst way possible with a runner-runner single card flush, and we're left with a severe chip stack deficit. After this, there's very little that we could fold, given how big blinds are. We're lucky. We're lucky in that the next hand we get is a pair of 8s, so pretty strong hand. Of course he's shoving all in. He should be shoving all in with basically any hand because, again, blinds are so big. At this point, I think blinds are 400, 800 with 200 in the middle, so there's 1,400 chips out there every time. That's half of my stack. He should risk it to try to win the tournament with any 2 cards. Obviously, I wake up with pocket 8s, and I'm calling happily. And I win it. His pair on the river doesn't mean anything. So the next hand, We have 5,700. Again, blinds are 400, 800. We're on the button with a 7 deuce. I choose to fold. The reason I fold here is simply because we've seen that he is making the proper adjustment to call widely, to shove widely in situations that he should be doing so. That means that he's more than likely going to call our 7 deuce shove wide enough to make it a questionable play, and I think that we can do better. So we fold there, and wake up with a king 8. At this point, we would be calling a shove, but he folds to us. And his fold indicates that, maybe we need to widen things up a bit. Certainly not be tight with our shoving requirements, but it could be worthwhile now to steal with any 2 again. So we shove with 9-7, and he calls. 9-7 is certainly a strong enough hand that we would have shoved even before seeing him fold to our king 8. But he calls with a king 5, which is definitely strong enough to justify a call. And as we've said before, any face card is probably worth calling in stack size situations like this once your head's up. So his call was good. He ends up winning the tournament with it. Makes us a little bitter that he won with his king X hand against our pocket queens earlier on, but that's okay. We ended up in second place, and we played well. We made lots of good shoves and identified the situations where we had to call extremely loosely, where we had to shove very loosely in order to make profitable plays, and that's what it's all about. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up today. For more poker training, subscribe to grinderschool.com and use the discount code WSOP25 to save 25% on your first subscription.